Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today I'm talking with Matt Sakatani Roe, the DP of the new film Purple Hearts on Netflix. He also shot a bunch of really great music videos, Imagine Dragons and Cage the Elephant and stuff like that, and a few episodes of the Beverly Hills 90210 reboot back in 2019, I think it was. This episode is full of a bunch of great stuff, great tips, bread and butter tips that you can use on your film shoots. We talk about filmmaking as a whole. I know I've said that. I need to be more specific than that, I suppose, in these intros. But, just not only the industry, but just the sort of fundamentals, or however you want to think about that. This is a great one on the educational side of things, as well as Matt's an entertaining listen. So that's what you're in for. I'll let you get to it. Please enjoy my conversation with Matt Roe. Tell me how you got started creatively. Were you always a visual person, or did you come to cinematography through architecture or something like that?
I grew up in Alabama, so I kind of have that football redneck lifestyle. I had a lifted truck, went to Auburn football school, not really thinking I was going to ever be an artist, if that's what you want to call it nowadays. But, I was always interested in video cameras. I had the DV camera growing up in high school, filming silly stuff, using it for projects, putting things together. I studied finance in Auburn. There really wasn't a photography outlet that I could join because I wasn't in the art program. You couldn't take photography classes. So I drove 80 miles every Tuesday to a community college, took photography classes. I had one professor, Holly Lavenstein, at the school that did a short film program that really opened my eyes. After school, moved out to Los Angeles, slept on my grandmother's couch for it seemed like a year and a half, and just tried to find my way working as a photography assistant, working in grip, electric, all the random departments. And that's back in the day, working for $50 a day before there were kind of any collective, let's help each other, let's get the rates up. That was tough. Yeah. Eventually met a filmmaker named Mark Pellington, gave me an opportunity to be his intern. Worked with him for a good bit, but then my big break seemed to really be when he asked me to shoot his daughter's 5th birthday party video. And, he probably thought, oh, Matt's going to go run around with the camera, shoot some kids opening presents, will be great. But he told me, do whatever you want, make something cool. So I kind of just followed around a 5-year-old girl, experienced her birthday party, through the anxiety, the helicopter parent. She's ripping presents away from other people, kind of having a Darren Aronofsky, David Lynch vibe. I have a scene where a little kid's playing on a tiny piano, but I looped it in reverse so the audio is getting sucked back up into it. And he said when he watched it, I think he said his daughter cried, his mother-in-law hated it. But that kind of gave me my big break, and I was shooting a music video with him, go from intern to DP, based off a 5-year-old birthday party video shot on a XL1 Canon, I think.
Yeah, I've said this a million times on this podcast. I still have my XL2.
Yeah,
in the closet, but I have
to.
I have to. It's awesome. I have to run. I guess it's RCA to an HDMI adapter, and then record it with the Odyssey 7K Plus, which is hilarious, but still works. Tape deck's fucked though. But so when you were shooting that 5-year-old's birthday, how did you conceptualize were you just making it up as you went along, or did you kind of have an idea? Was there B-roll?
I kind of a lot of the work I do, I look for the subjectivity of a character's perspective. And if it's following around a 5-year-old girl who's maybe 3.5 feet tall, it's this was before the easy rig was even kind of a thing. I kind of put the camera down. I think I put a belt around my neck and just kind of ran around with her and just experienced her. It was a big elaborate party. There's stuff outside. She got lost. She fell, hurt her arm, but didn't cry. I followed her around. She's like, where's my dad? Where's my dad? And it wasn't until she found her dad, that's when the tears came. It was capturing the moment of a person experience the emotions of I need to show my dad that I need him in this moment. And I felt there's like some beauty to that, aside from the other weird sound design and Philip Glass score I probably put on the piece. But it was kind of eye-opening, and like kind of helped me kind of figure out like what I want to do to like make something that seemingly was supposed to be just like, a little kid's video, but it's kind of like everything I do, I want to find a subjective approach to it and have fun with it, regardless of the
Yeah.
budget.
Well, and I think there's something to be said for taking every job you can, even if it's not really a job, taking every opportunity, I should say. Because there's certainly a bunch of what I thought were going to be dumb gigs that like led to better stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and eventually, I still shoot with the director Mark Pellington. Like I did, he gave me the chance to do my first movie with John Hamm, Bruce Dern, Ellen Burstrom,
Yeah, that
Academy
was
Award winners. It was crazy, nostalgia.
what nostalgia, right? That's a great looking film.
Cool. Yeah, is I think Red Dragon and Cook Anamorphics, and that's actually where I met the supervising colorist of this film, Jill Bogdanovich. She kind of, great colorist, helped guide me kind of like early prep, LUTs,
So
style, fun stuff.
it all right. So we're jumping a little bit ahead, but I
Yeah, no
have to
worries.
now. No, not because of that, but because every single time I've been like, man, I really like how this looks. The colorist ends up being Jill. I want nothing more than to interview this woman because she has whatever my aesthetic is mentally, she either created and it seeped into my brain, or we came at that at the same time. I don't know what it is, but she, in my opinion, is A1.
I should also talk about the color. Brian Smallers was the supervisor. Jill was the supervisor. Brian Smallers was the day-to-day colorist. Let me put you in touch with both of them after this.
Please, that would be amazing. Because I'll kind of half quote myself, but these days, cinematography squarely has a foot in post and on set. You definitely can't have one with that. No one's shooting 709 for a film. But talk to me about how you develop those LUTs and stuff. Like, are you a little more hands off, or are you more like kind of? Because I've noticed all of your work down to the music videos have a pretty solid color element.
Yeah, like LUT creation is kind of like that's where everything kind of starts for me because like I came up in like the back end of like the film stocks. Like having like the different testing, like you push it, you pull it, like what can you really do? But when LUTs like kind of came out, like it's a way to kind of put a stamp on your image. But most importantly, it helps people see on set because everyone, now everyone has a monitor.
Right.
And I've never really subscribed to the idea of giving everyone 709 to the video village and then knowing, okay, it's going to look amazing by the time it's done. I've really like taken on the idea of shooting LUTs and the creation of shooting LUTs. Like I love live grade, being able to manipulate the images on the fly. But on this project, I went in with Jill and Brian Smaller's colors, and they kind of just showed me different things. Going over different concepts, talking about images, thinking about, oh, the shadows can do this. I don't really get into, oh, I need like a few more points of like the shadow area or take the hue saturation curve and bend it this way. Like I'm familiar with all that stuff because I've done like the Resolve classes and stuff like that. But like when you're working with colorists, like letting the artist have the tools and then interpret the vision and just speaking things, talking about things like on a high level, I felt that's the best way to work with a colorist. Like I did this one project where, we're looking for this low contrast vibe, but I told them, make it feel like the image is in a cloud. And then one colorist is going to get there one way, another colorist is going to get there a different way, but letting like the artist really can drive those wheels, I feel like is the best process to kind of get the objective of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Well, and also it's the kind of idea of like decentralized command, right? Like if you micromanage the colorist, you're gonna probably both end up with something neither of you like.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. Yeah, because like once we created these LUTs, we had like 5 kind of shooting LUTs that we kind of played with. We took them to set, and I've always been like a one show LUT person, just because in VFX things get sometimes complicated, and you have to like double check if things are coming back the right way. Like I'm sure there's reasons to use multiple LUTs, but with this one we kind of found like our hero one. Shoot with it. I kind of like the way the shadows sat and like with a little bit of bluer area. I like the roll off of like some of the warmth that was added. And one of the things they did that I really like is there's this little kind of fringe of cyan sometimes where the shadows meet like the midtones. And it's just like one of those ideas of like color separation. Like how can you get like these two-dimensional images we see on screens really pop in a third dimension? And that's one of my big things is where I like to kind of hide in like a secondary color somewhere, or kind of find things with its, working with art direction. That's where it kind of starts. Kind of build your tools on set, let the LUT kind of work in unison with all these other departments.
Yeah. Well, so, nowadays, especially with cameras being so good, like it's hard to pick up, the Venice, the Alexas. I still think the C500's rad, like, Reds. It's hard to, do you believe that any one of those cameras gives you something that the other doesn't? Or do you think that kind of, the capturing of all that data, the grading is what gives you that final whatever it is? Because some people believe that there's a je ne sais quoi to any kind of camera,
I think it's basically the person holding it. It's like any one of those tools can be a great tool. Upstream color, I think it was what, like a GH5 or something like that. Like, I've worked on a movie on a 5D with the director Mark Pellington called I Melt With You, with Eric Schmidt shooting it. And like we kind of had to unravel like the 5D color science back when it first kind of came out. And like we
the
did
Mark
this
II.
whole yeah, the Mark II. Like we kind of
Yeah.
this whole test, with the colorists of like shooting a film stock on a gray card and abstracting the grain. And like that was like back in the day, like before anyone else was kind of doing it. And it was fun to kind of explore the tool. And I think, once you kind of take the tool, understand its functionality, you could film beautiful stuff with basically anything. And I think just having that mentality of like, you don't always need the best stuff, regardless of budget, just make the best with what you got, whether it's like a one light package, like a van package, or like multiple fleet of 10 tons. Like sometimes I've been on big sets and you have every kind of tool imaginable. And sometimes like you start to turn things off to get back to where the foundation is.
Well, to your point about the one show LUT, it's like you could think of it the same way as like, sometimes a 3-lens package is a lot better than having every lens. I just shot a little spec ad and we had a full set of atlases and we ended up using like 3 of them. Mm-hmm. We would test them, like we were using them all, and then we were just like, it was like the 40 and the 65, I think, were like the only 2 that we needed.
You could do a whole, I think Nostalgia basically did the whole movie on the 65 and the 40.
Yeah.
Like great lenses. And I feel like that's, having that kind of narrowed selection versus having that variety, and it helps kind of create a visual palette with your images. And I'm granted I've gone on shows where I take two lenses of like two lens sets with probably like 8 to 9 lenses in that set, for certain situations. But then you always gravitate, I love the 40, I love the 65. Sometimes use the 75, but sometimes the 100 is good too. But finding that narrow selection tends to be, a focused idea.
Yeah. So I'm actually fascinated by early digital cinematography from a technical perspective, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff people can learn about what we were trying to do between film and digital. Because now digital is like good enough that whatever, if you want to shoot film, like that's fun. But there was a time where the argument wasn't we wanted to make it look like film. It was more that we wanted it to make it look good, because digital looked like ass. What were some of those tinkering things, like you were saying, like shooting a film stock on a gray card? So you just overlaid a still image of the grain over the video?
Yeah, I think it was a while ago, but I think we just shot like a gray card and kind of use some kind of like overlay tool to kind of pull out like the noisy channel of the film grain, apply that back onto the 5D Mark II footage, and then it seemed to help the highlight roll off, because those cameras, like I feel like they're 8-bit color science, kind of like shooting reversal, protect the highlights, but then you also still don't have much in the shadows. A lot of my music videos were kind of started with that process, and then finding ways to color it, finding ways to make it look more like film.
Yeah, because I remember during the adapter days, you'd get the DVR.
I love those.
Yeah, I remember one product. I can't remember who made it, but it had a spinning ground glass instead of a static one, so that the quote unquote grain pattern would move instead of having, that kind of hard vignette with a static quote unquote grain.
I remember using that
None of
thing
us could afford
once.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember using that thing once. I was like, what kind of camera did you connect it to? Was it like that P3 camera or the
There was
HVX 200?
There's the HVX, the DVX, I think you could connect it to an XL, but that was like a weird adapter because the XL was mirrorless, I suppose. And then you had, the Sony F3? F3.
Was it 900? Well, there's a couple of them.
The F900 was the Attack of the Clones camera.
Yeah.
That big shoulder rig joint. But yeah, I think the F3 was around that.
Anyway. Oh yeah, I remember. I don't know. I don't think I ever used that one, but I remember like when I did a shoot with it, I was in a basement and I threw the thing on and we never tested it. And I'm like, oh, why is it so dark? And then it's a quick lesson to learn about stop compensation.
And just running tests.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get a lot of opportunity to like do tests, or do you kind of have to tinker on your own? Pardon me, on your own time, and then
I do a little bit of tinkering on my own. I have friends who have cameras. I have good relationships with all like the rental houses we use. I can kind of go in anytime, throw up a set of lenses, kind of look at stuff. But it's never like I was working with an AC on the last project, and he worked on stuff with like Fincher and like legendary filmmakers. He was talking about having like 3 to 4 weeks of camera tests.
Yeah.
And I don't know if like the generation nowadays, at least on certain projects, like if we have that ability to kind of have that kind of testing and, trying to find like, okay, this is where my shadows and this is when I want to test like the diffusion on this type of set with this piece of wood and this kind of color costume. Sometimes we only get like 2 days to do a hair, makeup, wardrobe test, and sometimes we get one. Like the last show, I don't think I got any. It just depends, but I think it's important to try to figure out like, here's your palette, here's your paintbrush, this is the lens, learn what not to do with the lens, learn what the lens can do, like look at the fall off. The last show I did really get to do a test. I just kind of threw out every kind of overhead diffusion quality, kind of like I always wanted to learn, like sometimes it's hard for me. Is it quarter grid? Is it half grid? Is it, is it a silk? Is it a black silk? Is it a gray grid? I just threw up every single one of them, kind of try to roll tests, trying to figure out what's the right tool for the right situation. And then I think that helps inform, the project helps communicate with the grips. But then, sometimes it changes like project to project and you're feeling something different. And I feel like retesting old ideas can sometimes be valuable.
Absolutely. Did you have any interesting notes from the overheads test? Because that's something I'm fascinated by.
I love black grid cloth.
Black grid cloth.
Black grid cloth. Yeah, it's big stop loss. I forget what it was. But actually on Purple Hearts, we used a lot of it for our night scenes. Sometimes like you think, oh, you go throw up some LEDs, throw up a balloon, throw up something like, soft quality. But we would put 18Ks in our condors, throw up a 8 by or 12 by black grid cloth and make a kind of like a big shamir on an 80-foot lift. And just use it to kind of like light our scenes. And the main set for Cassie's apartment was on a 3rd story, and we shot practically. So very difficult to maintain and do time shifting through the different script notes. Like, I think we had like 30 or 40 pages in that apartment, and they always would not schedule like the same kind of day just based on functionality. So we had to have these kind of tools, and grid cloth with an 18K black grid cloth seemed to be the way to go for our night vibe.
So this is highlighting my ignorance. I literally didn't know I knew they made gray. I didn't know black grid cloth was an option.
It's really cool. Jake Reeder, T-Grip.
Oh, yeah. Shout out Jake.
Yeah.
What does that look like compared to just, using a regular grid cloth and just dimming down like crazy?
It shifted the Kelvin. I think I metered it right around like 6,500 to 7,000 Kelvin. So it shifts. It's a little cool. It has that kind of like soft quality that you get kind of from a Chimera, but it was somewhat still directional, which was
Yeah.
good. So instead of just like, throwing up a balloon and kind of letting it go in universal, like we were able to kind of shape it because we can still kind of put the condor and shoot it back in a direction and just kind of have that quality. But which is interesting too. Sometimes you don't like it, but you get kickback when you put a big light like that into like an 8 by frame unless you contain it off the bucket. But then it seems like we got a 2-for-1 where we would get the soft kind of bluer quality kind of shooting into the set, but then we could also kind of bounce it the opposite direction because we didn't have the biggest budget in the world. So sometimes we only get 1 or 2 condors. But if we're doing a big night scene, we could use it to bounce light off the bounce, colorize it a little bit, and have it backsplash on the set behind us.
Huh. It's actually really cool. Never would have thought it. Were you mostly using hot lights like that, or were you leaning on LEDs as well?
Oh, we get a little bit of everything. I like hard lights, just because you kind of shape them a little bit. I kind of growing up, I got into trouble trying to Kino flow everything. You used to have a
Yeah.
set with tons of soft light, and you end up trying to like get rid of it. But then it's kind of finding ways to kind of embrace like directional hard light. Was one of the things I try to do on this. But inside the house, we had light tile. Blake Farmer gaffer rigged up light tile all over the place,
Yeah,
Titan
those are great.
tubes, everything running down to a blackout app. So when I was operating, because I operated the main camera with my 2 other operators, Dennis Noyce and Luke, uh, it was tough to try to make calls while you're kind of shooting on set. We always had the comms on, talking to DIT, gaffer, key grip, and everything just kind of going remotely was like the only way to kind of do this. Because sometimes I had the light while having the easy rig while talking to the actors and running around drinking a coffee.
Right. To your point about directionality and stuff, something that Ellen Curris told me in that podcast was how we were talking about diffusion both on the lens and in the light, and she was saying how she prefers directionality to an image, which is why silks are no good and a pro mist is no good, because it doesn't have any, in her words, doesn't have any sensibility. It's just fuzzy. So she wants like a quarter grid or a half grid or something, because it's still soft, but it has, intent or whatever you want to say, and that stuck with me. That, like, as you were saying, that gave me sort of permission to not use Kinos. Love Kinos, especially their LED panels are, in my opinion, and I've done the tests, literally the best panels you can use color wise. But, to work a little harder and be a little more, I guess, not take risks in such a sense, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess, well, it's interesting because like I guess you could think of it as taking a risk because like you sometimes with hard light you worry about, oh, could you get the little eye kind of dimple underneath an actress, or can you like bring out the skin texture too much if you use hard light? So for me on this film, it was like the concept of trying to do less and like really embrace it. Like there's some times where like you see imperfections in a face, but then you look at like so many great films that have been made, and sometimes they just let people like get blasted by the sun and not have to worry about, oh, should I put an opal? Should I put a grid? No, just let the sun hit the face and it looks rich and it looks real. And I think that was one of the things like, I pushed myself to try to really do on this project because, going back into kind of whole concept of the lighting of the film, like we had a whole arc plan. Like the characters, they come from fragmented lives. They had fragmented emotions. So in the start of the film, in the first act, we really wanted to have that multicolor approach. Like the characters are fragmented, so should the light. We had reds, blues, greens, playing off the concept of the film with the political polarization. You have one person from a blue household, one person from a red household, and together they become purple. And in the film, as the characters kind of find the relationship and the connection between each other, I start to slowly introduce sunlight. So I take fragmented color spectrum and bring it into a full harmonious like color spectrum, like daylight, and letting that arc kind of develop throughout the film. The goal was to make sure we ended the film on a sunny day, which thankfully it happened.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of like the first time you really see the characters being hit by hard directional non-diffuse sunlight, and it's supposed to represent their emotional arc and their energy.
That's kind of what we were saying. I can't remember if we recorded this part or not, if this is in the preamble, but that speaks to the point of, like we were saying about how, cinematography is a string of images, and it's not, 3-point lighting every time because it's pretty.
Mm-hmm.
It represents story, not just looking good,
Yeah, and I push myself to do this too, because like sometimes like if you end up with like an image, you just think it's not so pretty, but like, does the frame tell the story? Does the light set the emotion? And sometimes like it's just good, and like did not have like the most beautiful images, like sometimes because you can't have beauty without ugliness, and just trying to find ways to like put up an image, let it be transmissible, let it be accessible. And it seems like sometimes if you kind of like, oh, here, add light, here's an edge, here's something else, here's some like cool color, sometimes the image, I don't know, like, can it be palatable, you know?
Yeah. Well, and to your point, like, film in every form, art, honestly, is it's juxtaposition. Like they say, jazz is the notes you don't play and all that shit. But like, you can't. Yeah, if you just have all beauty, it's not beauty. It's just flat.
Mhm.
It's just one emotion.
Yeah, like that was actually bringing up jazz. Like that was what like when the director and I, Liz Rosenbaum, like we talked about like having our sets. It's kind of like, every day we came in with a plan. We met every morning for like an hour before call to kind of, we worked out the spots, making sure here's where we want the characters to get to. But we did leave a little bit of flexibility with the blocking, with the actors, with the space to kind of transform as we went. And like thinking of it as jazz, like if Dennis, a camera operator, was playing the snares, I was B camera operator on a little bit longer lens off to this side playing the trumpet. Liz is kind of conducting the orchestra from behind cameras, and then Blake, Jake, and Michael, my DIT, are just kind of manipulating the images and kind of mixing the levels as they're coming through the speakers, and
Yeah.
just having that kind of fluidness to the set. I think really helped bring the authenticity to the performances and letting the characters feel like they kind of had that freedom. And one of the things I just dislike sometimes is like when you have a character like run in and like hit a mark because it's the frame you really want to hit. Granted, that's very important, like with dolly work and kind of finding the marks for the assistants and everything like that. But sometimes when you're trying to capture the energy of two people yelling at each other, having that kind of onset freneticness is, it's gonna be fun.
Well, and also you don't want to catch an actor in the middle of them delivering a really hard line or whatever, going,
Yeah,
checking their
check.
feet. You mother, I gonna,
Yeah, but then like when we were operating, we would do that. The ACs, like Bradley Wilder first AC is amazing, but like we would always like count our feet. Like if we were running back with an actor, we go and stop. We would do the little V's on the ground, kind of put the marks for us too. So it wasn't like kind of having a bunch of cats inside an apartment for 40 pages, but
Right.
we tried to be focused as much as we can, but we still wanted that opportunity because like if a character sat down, like great, run in there, grab an emotion, like do the scene from that. Like having that kind of inspiration was fun.
Sure. I wanted to ask you about your music video work, because you've worked with some great bands over the years. And what it feels like that used to be how people could make a mark as a DP, and now it's not so much because people aren't investing in music videos like they used to. What was your experience like shooting with? Because you did like an Imagine Dragons video, right? And like
Yeah, that epic 12-minute one, that was fun.
yeah, yeah, and a few like metal bands and stuff like that. Like, what were some of the lessons you learned on those films, and maybe some risks you were allowed to take because of potentially there being less heat on you, or was there the same amount of heat on you because the label was involved?
It was interesting because a lot of those music videos I did with like my mentor Mark Pellington, who I shot the 5-year-old's birthday party with, and he brought me up and then kind of threw me into these bigger projects. And I think I was like ignorant at the time because I didn't really understand you know, the importance. I guess there was a lot of money involved, but for me, it was still kind of just running around with the camera. And it wasn't until like, if I didn't make my day one or two times, and you learn really quickly that it's still a business.
Yeah.
We're not just out here making art. Sometimes you can on certain budgets, but it's very important to make your day, very important to have like the communication, achieve the objective of what you're out there to do. Um, but with like some of those projects, specifically the Imagine Dragon one, it was kind of like a lesson in narrative filmmaking from like an early start to go out there, like try things. I think that video was shot in like 3.5, maybe 4 days, but to get that much footage out of those 3 days, to learn how to move fast, be minimal, learn what you need to light and what you don't. And I think that was a lesson of just kind of being restrained and kind of learning how to hold back. Could I light, famous musicians in a space with like a couple par cans, like on big mambo combos coming into a second story window, and call it acceptable, and not have to feel like I needed to, book light key every scenario? And I think it's having that kind of ability to kind of pull back. And I guess those are still considered risks. Like, does a character or an actor not have to look their best in every shot? Can they sometimes have those facial imperfections that, we as DPs see, like, oh, is the nose shadow in the right place? Or do you feeling the under eyes to an extent? But, I guess that was my approach, is like just trying to think, like, can I do less with the tools that I'm given? Because I don't know I have all these tools at my disposal.
Yeah, that's a big one. If you were to go back and do it again, would you do it the same way, or having learned something now, would you change any elements of that?
I'd probably honestly, I'd probably overlight it now if I had to go back and do some of that stuff. Because I'd think about, you always want to think about your turnarounds, think about your day. Can you light a big wide and go into coverage with kind of minimal work? But, nowadays I'd probably do something a little different and kind of taking the set and making it bigger. I love giving directors a big clean set, potentially 270, 360 if I can do it. It's always fun with minimal kind of relighting and just kind of bring in an highlight or a key if you need it. But just kind of going through a place and finding the best possibility to make the most flexibility I can out of a sets was, I guess, what I would take back to those days.
Sure. When you say overlight, you mean like put too many lights or overheads?
Too many lights. I think that's what it always comes down to. Like, it's like anytime I've regretted a decision I've made, it's been because I had too many lights on in a scene. Whether it's because whether I'm trying to address a thing on a face that I see that I feel like could be done. And I pay a lot of attention to the facial structure, and I've worked on certain projects where that's expected, to kind of have that kind of beauty and that kind of look. But, it's always important to gauge that what project you're on, and to make sure you kind of light for the project and light for the story, and not light for the beauty.
Vanity. Yeah. Well, because like I know I used to work at ABC, and I was interviewing Joanna Coelho, who shot The Rookie, and The Rookie's a very ABC looking show. Mm-hmm. I figured out their visual language pretty quick working there. And they seem to really prefer kind of that, very flattering lighting on most of their stars. And she was saying they actually gave them quite a bit of leeway, but it is interesting, like, which clients are like, all right, you better, the DPs from Grace and Frankie, obviously, actors of a certain vintage are going to need and demand, the softest light possible. How do you combat that kind of, assuming you've come up against something like that? Do you push back, or do you just go, I got it, like, I'll figure it out? Or is there kind of an interplay?
Lighting a face, it's always been like kind of an interpretation, and you kind of have to gauge, one, the talent, gauge your clients, whether it's filmmakers, directors, screenwriters, producers, or studio. Knowing your audience, I think, is a really important task, because, at the end of the day, we're still, as a cinematographer, we're a business person. We have to be able to become asked back to a production. People have to like the work that we produce, and it has to kind of meet the expectations of what we're supposed to do. If a project comes to me and wants the kind of clean look, if you want to call it that, you do the best version you can. There's been amazing high key photography, and sometimes you see like high key photography nowadays and it feels unique because a lot of stuff has gone to the darker path. Sure. I love doing the darker stuff too, but I think having a balance in, like, if I feel like a project kind of, the story will motivate a specific, a frontal broadside key in a certain scene because the actor's doing a great job and I want people to see the face. You go to that tool of tricks. Specifically, like, kind of my go-to has been bleached muslin with a little bit of Roscoe pebbleboard behind it, sometimes tough spun on
Oh,
top of Roscoe pebbleboard into a circular bounce. You get the hard light from the silver, and the tough spun on top of it kind of like milks it out and diffuses it a little bit, so you can kind of have like a specular bounce that's still shapeable. So you move the kind of the bounce around and you kind of shape and have that nice kind of circular fall off.
that's really cool. Actually, that's a great. It's crazy how functional, utilitarian. What am I trying to say? Multifaceted muslin is for being such a thick fabric. You can do a lot with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think someone told me once, and I think we tested it. You put a light through muslin, you're going to get the same output through muslin at the same distance as you would as the bounce. So it's kind of like, it can be a 2 for 1. So what we did on one project is we put like silver behind it, so you kind of double activate it, and so you get kind of the hard light with the soft light. I forget I think we had a name for it. We also did a ultra bounce behind the muslin. I think we called it a ultra muzz. So you get the soft quality unless you don't want the silver. So you shoot in the muslin, you get the bounce off of that. The light transmission that goes through the muslin hits the ultra bounce and comes back through like double diffused. So you kind of get a 2 for 1 like spread on the face. And that was gorgeous. We would put sky panels into it, put tungsten lights into it, and it just kind of gave that kind of nice quality. And you could stagger as many as you want and upsize it, put 5 different 4x flops. And I think in Canada, my key grip was making 5x5s, which was like, seems like the perfect size. You put
Right.
like 3 of them, you have a 15-foot light source.
That's really cool. Yeah, there's so many, like, shout out to all the great gaffers out there, because some of them are so inventive with like, because that's almost like a thin ass book light.
Oh, it's amazing. You can kind of just kind of put it in like in a small area, and you can double break it if you need to. But it seemed like with that kind of formula, we were just putting things up. We were doing it outside and putting M90s into it, and it would just be like the perfect key for an exterior scene. And yeah, I should definitely shout out to all my gaffers and key grips that I've collaborated with, because my approach has always been like, same with like when LUT creation. I like to be kind of hands off. Like I know the tools, but then key grips and gaffers and first ACs, they're on set probably like 50 to 70% more times than I am. And they're on different sets working with different DPs, seeing different techniques. And each one of those like collaborators is going to come back to my set with a massive wealth of knowledge. And they can talk about like, yeah, I want soft light. Okay, what is soft light? Is it this bounce? Is it in the, beadboard? What you can bounce a light and bounce it off the wall of the truck if it's windy and you need something else,
Yeah,
like which I've done many times. But
sure.
yeah, just coming with like interesting tools of the trade.
Is there any particular? I mean, you've mentioned a few, but anything that you've been taught that was really like a cool aha moment for you that you can think of?
Think about it for a second. I think it's the tough spun on top of Roscoe silver pebble board,
Right.
making little tiny. You can size it up too, because I've seen it where it's been like a 2x2 little circular disc with silver and tough spun on top of it. You slide that in, and it seems like it's the softest, nicest, like kind of directional eye light that you can kind of put, because it having a circular source in the eyeball. I think this comes back to Harris Savides was talking about that back in the day. When you're doing like makeup commercials, like if you see like a square frame and an eyeball, it registers as like inorganic. But you put like a circular catch light in a person's eye, it tends to just have that kind of like emotional connectivity. And I think that's where sometimes people have gone when you see circular bounces on set, like someone's been taught that or learned that along the way. And it's something I always advocate for too. Sometimes you can put a little cutout on a square one if it needs to be a square, but I do like building like 3x3 circles, 4x4 circles, 5x5 circles with tough spun and Roscoe silver.
Yeah, that I think that I've learned a lot from at the beginning of the. I'm gonna make a sentence here. So at the beginning of the podcast, when I asked about like, oh, did you come from architectures? Because I've met a lot of DPs that came from architecture, and kind of what you're saying about round versus square is, round is organic. Humans are animals are round. They're not. There's no hard edges, and artificial is right angles. There's no right angles really. I mean, maybe
Mhm.
geodes or whatever, but
No, it'd
in
be weird if you
general,
looked outside and saw the sun and it was a giant square box, right?
yeah. Well, and to your point too, like that's it's kind of like those little extra thoughts that make you a more maybe valuable DP, because it's very easy to put up a sky panel with a Shamir on it and go like, there, that light's great because it looks great. But like you're saying, you'll see it in reflections and stuff where it's like, especially if you're a DP watching film, you go, sky panel, like in the eye, because we're always staring for catch lights.
Hmm. Yeah, the double catch light, I'm guilty of it sometimes because you just need to, and sometimes it's hard to work around. But I know like there's been a whole thing of like, is it one catch light or is it two? But so you can have a human being sit in a space and have multiple practicals on the opposite side of the conversation. And I think it's justifiable. And I think as cinematographers, we tend to catch things more so than what other people think. And I think it's always a balance. Like, am I lighting this scene for my cinematography friends, or am I lighting the scene for an audience, or who am I really lighting the scene for? And I've definitely been in the situation where I feel like, oh, I really need to impress some people in the cinematography circles. Oh, this is going to be a really good IG post. Let's
Yeah.
make it dark and make it contrasty, add some green and blue. But, teach its own.
I started playing a game that's fun for me but annoys the shit out of my girlfriend, which is where did that backlight come from? We'll be watching shit and I'll just be like, where's that backlight come from? And she's like, what? Oh, fuck. Because now I'm like making her realize that it's just, they're outdoors or whatever and the moon's here. And for some reason, there's just,
Yeah.
she hates that game.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to like sometimes not do it, but I think someone said once that like front light is, and especially commercial photography nowadays, is the new backlight.
Yeah. Well, that is funny how like things are so, it's, as David Fincher said, film is fashion. Things are cyclical. What was once the look in the, let's say, 40s, then people want to be the counterculture to that, and then it just kind of circles its way around. And now we're coming back to hard light, where soft light was the thing for the past 20 years or so.
Oh yeah, hard light is the thing right now. Like basically 20K to the face or sun to the face, and but having that commercial pop, it feels like something's like there's something refreshing about it. We haven't seen it in a while, and letting it come back and kind of seeing, the great designers of like, how can you do production design, costume, and the other departments? How can they work with this new technique that has been around forever, but sometimes comes back in and out of fashion? I've seen some really great work, just like frontal hard sources, and it just feels contemporary nowadays. And I'm assuming, it's going to change within the next couple of years. It'd be something different.
Yeah, that's actually brings something up. What's your relationship like with your production designers? Do you get a lot of time to talk with them? How do they inform your work?
My relationship with Kevin Bird, production designer on Purple Hearts, is almost, if not more important than my collaboration with my gaffer and my grip.
Hmm.
We're looking at sets. He's doing 3D renders. We're trying to figure out like what's the space going to look like, one from a story perspective, and two, like emotionally, how can we set the character into the space with the set decoration, working with the set decorators to make sure your background is going to look the way you want it, and there's not something poking out of someone's head, or it's going to have the right color palette. But like working with a set and making sure it has the right stuff seems like it's one of the most important things that a cinematographer can do. Because I make the joke on set, I spend more time moving chairs around on a set than I do lights.
Yeah.
Having the basically plan the footwork, or if you're building a set from scratch, making sure the dolly can fit through all these different places, making sure that your camera work and your floor plan is going to be able to be conducive. If you put too many chairs or put too many tables or put too many lamps, build the practicals into the set to find that motivation or find a reason for what you're going to do, probably past that practical to actually extend that light through. Or ideally, sometimes the practical works and that's all you need.
Yeah. Actually, I've got a dumb question for you. How many lamps are you guilty of putting? Like, what's your worst? like 40 lamps? How many lamps, like practical lamps, have you put in a scene? What's the maximum number?
In a scene? I think if you look at the first couple scenes in the bar, we basically did environmental lighting practically through the whole first part of the bar scenes, because we wanted that fragmented color spectrum, like the fragmented emotions of the characters. But every single one of those LEDs was placed by the wonderful like set decorators and on-set dressers, and then Blake, my gaffer, we'd go through like making sure like, oh man, is this neon gonna flicker? Great, okay, we got to find a way to work around it. Bobbinet on neons, great, easy trick to take
Really?
the intensity down that you don't necessarily see all the time. We tried streaks and tips, we tried neon dimmers, but sometimes they just don't pulse at the right hertz, even if they have like the nice voltage dimmers in the Variacs. You put a lot of neons in a scene, you're going to end up with problems. That's why working with art department, I went to the neon place, tested every single one of them on camera, and learning what we could work with. But if there's specific colors we wanted and we knew we had to control on set, Bobbinet was kind of the fast trick to kind of throw that up there. But there probably could have been, I don't know, a couple hundred practicals in that space, carnival lights rigged around the bar. And if, but it was fun because like we go in and like we want to do a scene. Oh, we want a little more shape. Great. Unscrew these practicals, turn these practicals off, throw these on, throw these off. And it was getting that like sometimes like 8-9 pages a day in a scene with probably like 7 characters and only having a certain amount of time. I think it's the way to go. Like we may have had a few strips of light tile just kind of for a soft key, but I feel like even with that, we sometimes kind of played it low or just to extend a little bit.
Well, at least that's motivated. The kind of what I was alluding to is when you see a scene in like a bedroom and this child has like 15 lamps around the room. And you never notice until you think about it. You're like, hold on, 1 on the bed, 2 next to him, 3 behind him, 2 next to the mom. There's 1 by the door.
It's funny because like when I ask for practicals sometimes in a space from art department, like I come in and sometimes I'll be overwhelmed with practicals, but I sometimes like that because then you can actually figure out, okay, let's establish the look. Let's pull out these 6 or these lights, and you kind of at least you're left with the foundation to be able to like, okay, I can block a scene and light it successfully and like in this fashion. I would just guess like I'm sure I probably like snuck like 5 to 7 in a background of a shot because I want an extra blobby out of focus bokeh somewhere.
Sure.
But if it looks good and then I think people are happy with it, who's to say like, was this the wrong choice? And I think that's the thing I struggle with, like cinematography sometimes. It's like, who are we really serving? We want to be the artists. We want to be able to be asked backed and be successful financially for our families. And if a person asked me, like, we want to have a lot of like interesting, sparkly background, great. I'm here to serve.
Yeah. Well, and it's also too, like, that's only something I guarantee you no civilian has ever been like, there's too many lamps in this house. It's just stuff we look at. I did want to ask you at the beginning, and then we kind of jumped ahead. But like, what were growing up? What were some of the films that sort of got you going and kind of influenced, wormed their way into your brain and kind of spoke to you visually?
I think my mom accidentally took me to see Seven when I was in elementary school.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, and that was definitely a big eye opener. And she said I walked away really understanding the concepts. I know from what I remember seeing it back when I was a kid, there's something about it that made me feel a certain way, like not necessarily scared or cried, but it was an intensity to the images that I found really interesting. And I feel like I walked away from that seeking out other material like that, or at least being fascinated by it. But later in life, one of the films that really kind of stood out to me is, of course, like Apocalypse Now. Like, never before I had seen a film that used color in such a fascinating way, trying to find an idea for each one of those colors. And I know Vittorio has these 3 books that are extremely rare and hard and expensive to try to buy. Someday I hope I can afford them. But just having that color theory, and like that's one of the things we tried to apply to Purple Hearts. Like in the film, red was like one of the characters' like conflicts. Whether she has diabetes, you have blood in the pharmacy, she can't afford her bills. Like throw a little like neon practical up there, making the dad's character his car maroon. Like trying to find informative, decisive decision making seemed like a way to kind of get through the film and without just like throwing out random ideas. And even if they're not registered, but just coming up with a concept, whether like yellow was family, yellow costumes for the mom character, blue was the theme of privacy and finding like solitude, but learning how to engage with other characters to get towards that warm light when the connections with the two characters define romance, the yellow warm. It helped kind of focus us as like, so many elements need to be cited, like, in an art department meeting, like, okay, what color is the cell phone cover, what color are the shades, like trying to find a reasoning for decisive decision making seemed like an expedited way to do your pre-production process and help find a way to guide those decision makings, because so many decisions have to be made in pre-production.
Yeah, and for the sort of aspiring filmmakers that may be listening, it needs to be kind of hammered down how important those production design and costume design choices are. Like, you can't just, you might only have access to your apartment if you're filming, but you really should do your best, hit Home Goods or something and like think about what that character would have, because people will notice if you're a guy and your main character is a girl and she lives in your bedroom, theoretically, like, no one's going to believe you. It's going to come off as cheap.
Yeah, it's a tough thing because like palette creation, I think that's kind of where people talk about production value is like, what is your palette? What are the tools you're working with? And it seems like, any camera seems like it can produce a good image nowadays, but then what is the stuff that you put in front of that camera? Whether it's, if the story takes place like a marriage story, it looks gorgeous. Two characters running around a very small white walled apartment. Robbie Ryan looks amazing, but it's like trying to find the right palette for your story and finding the right costumes. Because if you look at those two characters running around in that white wall apartment, they kind of just had that right level of separation or assimilation into their space that fit the story. And I think that's one thing, to kind of gauge, like, do you want to go super loud with your palette or do you want to go super contained? Is this in palette? Is it out of palette? Or why is it out of palette? And if it's out of palette, what can we do about bringing it back in palette? And I think, going through looking at these location photos, working with art department, you kind of have to put a thought to every single piece and object that is in your sets. Kind of feel like, is this part of my story or does this not work? Like we tried to put a practical lamp in Cassie's apartment in the film. And like the production designer looking at it, like I asked for it because I knew there's going to be scenes staged around this dining room table. We both looked at each other. I'm like, this does not go here. And it just didn't make sense. So we lost it, came up with another way to light the scene. But, I don't want to always like put something in the frame because it's going to make my life easier from a lighting perspective. But sometimes doing it for what's right for the story and not for the ease of the cinematography opens up the door to finding new creative solutions.
Yeah. Well, and, talking about like constricting the palette or exploding the palette, like I think it's important to, once again, to hammer home like having that palette, because if you think like, oh, I want this to be extravagant and there should be a lot of whatever, at a certain point, if you're doing everything, you're doing nothing. You're not saying anything with your image, or like it's just too much,
Yeah, and I think just coming down to like informed decision making, I think it's the most important thing to really like when you're in prep. Because like what I do when I prep for a film, I kind of just open up a blank Word document. I just start typing. I go, what are the themes? Why am I going to shoot wide shots in certain situations? Why would I shoot this way? I know on this one, I came up with like random things of like, okay, how this is going to be a handheld film. How I'm going to work in the proximity with these characters. What lenses are I going to pick? I think it was Bradford Young. It talked about when he's behind camera, he likes to kind of reach out and be able to touch that character because that lens kind of informs a certain technical decision that lets you be in a proximity to a character's personal space. Walking around with these characters inside sometimes a small space, let us really be next to them and feel that subjectivity and the emotions and the detail of the face. And, I carried, probably 8 lenses out of that set. How do I know, okay, this scene's great for the 32, this scene's great for the 65. But going back through like my notes and looking at why I wanted to make a certain creative decision, I think that was the most important thing.
Yeah. Were there any reference films that you guys use, or maybe photographs or anything, or were you kind of pulling this all?
We kind of pull. I looked
brain?
at different like photography elements, like specifically two films. Like if you can kind of see it in the way our blues fringe between like the blacks and the mids, Place Beyond the Pines was a
Sure.
big reference is color wise because the way they let the kind of expanding color palette, like at the start of the film with Ryan Gosling, transfer into a different color film with Bradley Cooper towards the end. That kind of helped me come up with the idea of the characters like color arc, multiple color fragments going into like the full spectrum light of the sun towards the very end. Also, a film by Reed Morano called Meadowland.
Hmm.
I think she operated herself with anamorphics. Amazing camera work. Um, and that was one of the things I tried to borrow from.
That's really cool. Yeah, the it's funny because you're told like, no, I think I was about to say something I don't think is true anymore, but I think most people. What am I trying to say here? I always think of every film or anything that anyone makes as part of like a lineage of images. So if yours starts with 7, and goes to, let's say, Place Beyond the Pines, putting elements of those things that you love or think are great isn't stealing, unless you only take one thing. That's stealing. But if you take like 3 things, that's synthesis. That's now you're part of this family tree of images, even if it's very loosely connected.
Yeah, well, you see that in art too. Is like everyone's kind of borrows from masters, and we watch films as cinematographers to be inspired and come up with ideas. So many people have done great work before me, and so many people are doing great work now. That's like I do love Instagram, just kind of seeing all the work of like all these other cinematographers doing great stuff. I think the problem that happens is that you start to get like an imposter syndrome and thinking like, man, there's a lot of good work out there. How am I going to ever like aspire to get to this kind of place? With this film, I feel like it's kind of like one of the first times I really could have like implemented like my best foot forward. And I guess it seems like based the way like Netflix is tracking right now, I think we're being rewarded, which is like it's gratifying to like actually have, finally a project that finds commercial success.
Yeah. Well, you said this off when we weren't recording, but it apparently beat out Gray Man after that first weekend it was out.
Yeah, I think I was tracking it over the weekend, and then I saw people posting about it, and I guess it's #1 right now. But like I think what I'm most excited about for the lead actress Sophia Carson, she's also singer songwriter. Her album's also like #1, like tracking above like all the other films that came out recently. So I'm super excited for her because such a hardworking person, and then she was on set, you know sometimes not even the trailer, just hanging out with us like behind camera on days she wasn't even there. And I think having that filmmaking family, it's great when that's being able to be achieved on set. And then I think it just creates like a community, especially when you're trying to make something for not the most money in the world, but everyone's working super hard, and these things are really hard to make. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things I try to help gauge in my life, because working on a film, you don't really have like nights off. You're kind of up early in the morning. Weekends, you're always prepping for the next week. And I think it's like, really important to try to find balance in this. Like if there's commercial success in a project, great. I might not work for a good bit, and like you spend time with my family, go out and do something in nature. And I think that also is prep for the next project, to kind of find that ability to deflate and kind of, avoid media for a little bit. I love films, but sometimes it's hard for me to sit down and watch like, artistic films that I on my list that I'm trying to knock off, because like sometimes it's just easier to kind of sit outside and, read a book or, play in the hose with my son.
Right. There's
Life
actually
experiences.
I don't know if it was on this podcast or if I heard it elsewhere, but that idea of like going out and doing other things is so important. And I think it's Stephen Coulter is a really good. He's like at the forefront of this studying of what do you call it? Not the zone. Flow state.
What was it?
When flow state, like when
Uh-huh.
you're working and you kind of lose time and do a lot of good work, and you're not thinking about what you're doing, you're just doing, losing yourself in whatever you're doing, whether it be working out or art or snowboarding, but part of achieving flow state does involve essentially a recovery period. And I think that holds true with what you're saying with your work life balance. Is like, if you don't have that time to just play with your kids or sit in nature or do something completely unrelated, your work will suffer. Just working all the time doesn't, yeah, it might make you money, but if you keep that workload up for a long enough period, you will have diminishing returns to the point of doing bad work. Or maybe worse, maybe not worse, repetitive. Maybe you'll fall back on just like tropes that you've done.
I can look back at my work and see exactly what you're talking about, and I feel like there's some people, everyone's different. Some people can go back to back and be extremely successful and brilliant. But I guess with myself, I feel like I do need these downtimes between, projects, whether it's commercials, films, or whatever. And I find it sometimes hard for me to take a camera on vacation. Like I was in Mammoth with my family. Like I like going to the mountain, getting my mountain bike and jumping off a cliff. But then my family, Matt, you're the photographer, take the family photo. I'm like, oh. And no one's ever satisfied with it too. The way I take it is always like, can you redo it? Or, it's a thing. But I
You're
think
doing the wrong angles. These are
yeah,
great angles.
but I think it's like finding that ability to unplug. If like that's the advice to any like young filmmaker, experience life, read, go out and do something. And it's sometimes hard because like Instagram is like a great resource for so many different like images and finding things to learn about photography or filmmaking. But I think life's just as important as a tool to try to master, to bring that back to each one of your projects.
Well, and something else that I've noticed that a few other DPs have echoed, so I feel like I'm not, talking out of my ass here, but I think it's very easy to go on, Instagram, YouTube, whatever, and try to figure out what the quote unquote correct way to do something is, when a lot of times the best way to learn photography, cinematography, whatever your art form may be, painting, is to just push everything else aside and goof around. Goof around. People need time to like goof around with their art form and just see what happens. Maybe it'll suck. Maybe it won't. It's like with writing. They always say like it's better to write 20 pages that you're going to throw away than to sit there and not write anything because you're nervous you're not doing it correctly.
Yeah, during COVID, during the lockdown, it's funny. Like I actually got more inspired to do photography and tinker when I had zero work. And then one of the things my buddy Ryan Wood, who's a great operator, we'd give ourselves photography assignments every week. And the first photography assignment was to shoot an egg. Could be on a table, could be on a background. How do you shoot an egg, light an egg, photograph an egg with the lens to make it unique? And I heard this from I guess it was some kind of photography school thing back in the day. So he and I both shot eggs. Like I came up with a way to put like a nice horizontal line off a white desk, create a gradient background, silhouette the egg, do something. He did something completely different where I guess he turned the lens around, did some macro photography of the egg on his countertop. But we took that and like every week we kind of gave ourselves a new assignment. Let's go shoot points of intersecting commerce. Oh, he went out and shot like a road, met a person inside a building, talked to them, did portraits. I went to some kind of underpass, did graphical landscape, black and white photography. But just going out and trying to find little fun tasks. It seemed like it gave me a kickstart to get reinvigorated coming out of the pandemic, to then go back to back to back. I think 3 projects nonstop. Now I'm like kind of in my downturn right now.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because like an egg is a very small but almost perfect analog for a human head. So good exercise.
It's interesting. I think it's going out and trying it. Like everyone's going to do it differently. I'll have to send you the ones I did of mine, but it's unique, and I was actually proud of it to kind of come away with it.
That's cool. Shit, man. Well, we've really blazed through this hour. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna have to let you go because it's a work day. But before I do, I like to ask everyone the same two questions. It has changed a lot recently because various DPs are, haven't done. I don't need to over-explain this. Anyway, first question: is there a piece of advice or maybe something you've read that has stuck with you that you think would be worth sharing with people listening? Something that kind of maybe has is on repeat in your head a lot.
I think it's basically one of the techniques that I brought into this last film, going back and looking at the work that I've done in the past, was to seem like sometimes, don't overlight, or sometimes find restraint in your lighting. Not every scene needs an uplight beadboard Silver Surfer. Not every light needs an opal diffusion. Like, I remember there's one scene in the bathroom where Nick and Sophia are in the tub, and it's probably like an M40 coming in through the window. And I'm like, oh man, on the day, I'm like, man, I wish I put an opal in front of that light to kind of diffuse it coming on her face. She's a famous actress. She needs to look beautiful. I saw it in dailies and I saw it in the film. Like, I'm really glad I didn't put that opal in there. Like, let the light be harsh. Let it have some shape and definition, because that hard light coming through the window, it did something different to the character, where you feel like more empathetic, where they feel like the character is like more vulnerable. Sometimes, like walking around outside, like if we had someone on standby with the bounce, I just wave them away. Like, we don't need to bounce and uplight the eyes. Like, the characters are having this, difficult process. Let's see the shape on the face, see how it's created. Or if like a special like area and like the character walks in and out of darkness, is it acceptable to be dark back there, or does it need a light? And I think finding that kind of restraint was like really important, especially through this process, to learn when to basically stop or not light.
Yeah. Something that stuck with me is something that Alejandro Mejia said, which was someone told him, like, if you have two lights, you have two problems. If you have one light, you have one problem.
That's a good idea. Sometimes I've gone into like 8 problems. But
Yeah.
It seems, and you hear this a lot through other cinematographers. Like, it says, like, if you have a problem, start turning off lights, and that's really true. But I think to implement it, it takes practice. But it's like, it's taking restraint, learning when to take risks, because you want your light to be beautiful on the actors, and it needs to be as to, I guess, everyone's certain acceptable palette. But just trying to gauge that, with your collaborators, working with the actors, what is the acceptable level of what this face needs to look like in this specific scene? And it's a complex question with many complex solutions, but trying to learn what that right path is. And I think that's kind of like the process, at least for me, is discovering like who I am as a cinematographer.
Yeah. Second question. I was like, where was I going with this? If Purple Hearts was going to be in a double feature, what would you make the other film?
I would like reluctantly say Place Beyond the Pines. That's a high level, especially for myself, of some of like the best filmmaking I've ever seen. But it's probably the film I watched the most preparing for this project. The color palette, Sean Bobbitt's camera work, the way they did close-ups, the way they did frames, the way they held compositions, the way they walked around with their feet. It's by far one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I would like to say it could play with that, but probably play second. But who knows where it's going to be considered in the next couple of years.
Hey, man, you're programming the double feature. You get to play it wherever you want.
Great.
Well, thanks again, man. That was a lot of fun. And weirdly enough, I learned a lot. So that doesn't always happen. Sometimes
nice.
I learn a little.
It's cool that you do this. I think it's important for people to find it, hear it, and learn from it.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F&R Mattbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.